amazing orchestration that only God could have done. And when you hear that, you will know this was his doing. No human being could ever have conjured up this sequence of events and this connection of people to deal with an emergent situation when Tom was in the Philippines. So that'll be after I finish sharing with you a little bit of the story of our ZIM. I think it'll be probably unfair to just jump into the organizational side. I have to tell you a little bit about my own life and how it came to be that God, in his mercy, reached out to this young man in Delhi, India. In fact, while we were flying in here this afternoon, my wife's sitting next to me, and by the way, I'm always delighted to have my wife with me. She is almost never with me. I can't compete with the grandchildren anymore. She is at home. Somebody once said to Winston Churchill, "Have I ever told you about my grandchildren?" He said, "No, and I want you to know how much I appreciate it." So I won't tell you much about that, but Margie is with me this weekend, and it's a delight for me to have her here. But as we were flying in, I showed her a letter that I received just before we boarded from my sister in Toronto. She's married to Sundar Krishnan, who's a well-known expositor. Sundar is now my brother-in-law. We grew up from the time we were 6 years old. When I came to know Christ, Sundar was preparing for a course in nuclear physics, became a nuclear physicist, went on to Toronto, Canada, became their top safety expert there, and then God tapped his shoulder to go into the ministry. And that's where he is now, and he's been in the ministry now for 35 years. We are almost the identical age. He's 6 months older than I am. I never let him forget that. And but she wrote to me, and she said, "I'm in Arizona vacationing with Sundar, and we were in Lima before that." And she went on to meeting people who'd been touched by this ministry, and she said, "I just want to say something to you, Ravi." She said, "Dad always thought you would end up in jail in your life." That's her exact words. "Dad always thought you would end up in jail." And I remember him telling Mom that I was really a rotter, had no purpose in life, and that I was going to end up in jail. She said, "Today all I can say is God had plans far different to what any one of us had ever envisioned for you." And you know, when your own sister writes a long, protracted letter of affirmation and appreciation, you know how the grand weaver has worked in your own life. I used to listen to a lot to English music when I was supposed to be studying. I had my physics textbook by an Indian author by the name of G.L. Datta. Anybody who studied science in India knows the name of G.L. Datta. The only problem was if you'd open my book, it would always open on the same page because I never turned it. I would just sit there and I'd be daydreaming. We used to sit around the dining table, the 5 of us kids, assigned to study for 2 hours. I'd be staring at G.L. Datta, but with the low tones of music in the background. And he used to be called the voice of Radio Ceylon, Choice of the People. Now it's Sri Lanka. And one day I remember listening to this song. I used to do a lot of memory work right from the time I was young. So I started listening to this song every day as it would come 6:30 p.m. And I would start memorizing it. This is the way it went. Ed Ames narrating it, that dates me. But in the background of that song was an Eastern chant while Ames would narrate it in these words. "From the canyons of the mind, we wander on and stumble blind, wade through the often tangled maze of starless nights and sunless days, hoping for some kind of clue, a road to lead us to the truth. But who will answer? As side by side two people stand together vowing hand in hand that love's embedded in their hearts, but soon an empty feeling starts to overwhelm their hollow lives, and if they ask the hows and whys, who will answer? As far upon a distant ledge, far upon a distant hill, a young man's lying very still. His arms will never hold his child because a bullet running wild has struck him down, and now he cries, 'My God, oh why, oh why?' And who will answer? As high upon a lonely ledge, a figure teeters near the edge, while jeering crowds collect below to egg him on with, 'Go, man, go.' And none will ask what led him to his private day of doom, and who will answer? As 'neath the spreading mushroom tree, the world revolves with apathy, while overhead a row of specks drowned out by discotheques. And if the secret button's pressed because one man has been outguessed, who will answer? Is our hope in walnut shells, worn round the neck with temple bells, or deep within some cloistered walls where hooded figures pray in shawls, or high upon some dusty shelves, or in the stars, or in ourselves, who will answer? And the chorus went this way: if the soul is darkened by a fear it cannot name, if the mind is baffled when the rules don't fit the game, who will answer? Who will answer? Who will answer? There were two things that struck me about that song. Number one, it was being narrated by an American. And I always thought growing up in India, if I could ever end up in America, I'd be okay. I'd find some prosperous lifestyle. Everything would be wonderful. I'd have all the income I needed. I wouldn't be plagued by questions anymore. That was the first thing. But the second thing was, it was not what would logically come into your mind, what is the answer, but it was who will answer. And that's what kept digging deep into my own soul, that everybody is asking the same questions, but this man is asking it differently. Who will be the answer? And I was driven to ask question after question after question. My mother looked at me one day totally frustrated and said, "Where do you come up with all these questions?" I said, "I don't know. They come up from within me. I have these questions." She was a simple woman. Yes, she was educated, but she was a very simple-minded person. My father and mother had an arranged marriage. He came from a rather sophisticated family. She came from a simple background, very different story, and it was a struggle for all those years. My mother could have walked out of that family with all the struggle and pain that was being inflicted upon her. And I mean that. Pain that was inflicted on her, emotional and physical. But she would look at us kids and wonder what would ever happen to us. And of all of the five, she had a special fear that I would be destroyed if she were not around there to protect me from my own dad. That's the way it was. But then at the age of 17, I was on a bed of suicide when a Bible was brought to me. I'd never cracked open a Bible in my life before that. And as that Bible was given to me, and I couldn't hold the Bible because my body was dehydrated. I had poisoned my system. And the moisture had gone with just all the nausea that it had induced. It spilled out all the moisture out of my body, and it was the servant in the house had rushed me to the hospital, and they put me on IVs. I would not have made it, but I couldn't lift my arm up. I couldn't put my hands together, and so it was my mother who was given the Bible, and she was told what chapter to read, and the man was not allowed to stay. He left. And he gave her John chapter 14. Jesus is talking to Thomas, who was the one who'd really gone to India to preach the gospel in the southern tip of India, of Kerala. And the first 7 of his converts were from the highest caste of the Hindu priesthood, called the Nambudris. My ancestors were all Nambudris. They came from the highest caste of the Hindu priesthood. And here I'm now listening to Jesus talking to Thomas. I couldn't put it all together then. I knew nothing of this then. All I knew is that he's talking to this man, to whom he says, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes unto the Father except through me." And then as it goes on in verse 19 of chapter 14, he says this: "Because I live, you shall live also." That was the who I'd been looking for. That was the who I'd been looking for. Because I live, you also shall live. And I just prayed a simple prayer. I said, "Jesus, if you are who you're claiming to be, the author of life, the giver of life, take me out of this hospital room. I will leave no stone unturned in my pursuit of truth. I will follow you with my whole heart." That was when I was 17 years old. I celebrated my 69th birthday 2 weeks ago, 52 years ago. That transformation took place. I have never looked back, except look back with amazement. And a day never goes, like today, my sister writing to me and just saying, "I can't believe all that God has done and accomplished in your life," and so forth. There are questions. People have questions. People suffer from emptiness, no meaning. They want something to hold on to that tells them life can be put together, that there are not just answers, there is a who to whom you can be related. And so when I came to Canada and was going into business, long story, I won't belabor all of that, I was going into the hotel and catering, the hospitality industry. I saw what was going on in those hotel rooms night after night. I was only 20 years old at that time, and I said, there are more problems here than solutions. People are coming here barren and empty, and once that midnight hour strikes, a mania seems to break out in these places. All kinds of things happen. Said, I don't want to be hanging around this the rest of my life. I turned in my resignation, went into theological training, and graduated and pursued several studies, both at Trinity in Deerfield and then at Cambridge University and so on. All that happened in my heart, God had prepared for a purpose. And in 1983, when I was a professor in Nyack, New York, for the denomination, that's where I first met your pastor, by the way, Pastor Joe. We've known each other for many, many years. I was with the Christian Mission Alliance. I still am licensed and ordained by them. I've been with them now for 42 years of ordained ministry. I'm licensed with them. But as I was a professor there, I said, this is really not my calling. I'm doing it to honor my leaders. I'm not an academic. I'm an evangelist. I'm an apologist. And Billy Graham had asked me to come and speak for him at Amsterdam 83. And here, speaking to the world's leading 4,000 evangelists, I'd sat down afterwards. Dr. Graham had been so kind in his comments about that message. I didn't even know until that point he knew I existed. Really. And as he chatted with me afterwards and before, I said, you know, I've noticed something out here. And while flying back with my wife, Margie, we'd gone from Amsterdam to India, saw the poverty there amongst the clergy and lack of education. I put the two together and I said to her, almost every evangelist speaking to the evangelist was basically talking about evangelism to the unhappy pagan. I said, and that's wonderful, but nobody's telling us how to reach the happy pagan. And there's a lot of happy pagans around, those who are not even asking the questions. I said, if your life is falling apart, yeah, you need a doctor. But if you think you're well, but you don't realize that inside of you is something that is not immediate, but is just as fatal. How do you reach that kind of person? So I told her I was going to go back and resign my job. And you know, we had 3 young children. I was the chairman of the department. You had a salary coming in. You had all the security. What are you going to do with 3 young kids and you're going out on a step of faith to start a new ministry? So I said to her, don't tell your mom and dad about this, please. No, because he gave me quite the interview before I married her. And he was a rigorous chemical engineer. About the only thing he didn't ask me at that time was the length of my trousers. He'd asked everything else from my bank account, what I planned to earn, how I planned to support her, and all of that, because he expected it to be my duty. I said, please don't tell your mom and dad about this. As a matter of fact, don't tell anybody about it. Let's just pray. If we had $50,000 from somewhere, we'll take this as the Lord's prompting to move ahead. I want to start a Christian apologetics ministry and build a team that'll defend the faith in the midst of audiences comprised of the happy pagans, in the academic arena, in the intellectual arena, in the business arena, and in the arts. 4 of those arenas, and of course within churches and so on. So she said, boy, that's a lot of money. I said, yep, we never received anything like that. I think I forget even what the biggest amount I'd ever received as a young student. And so we're praying about this. And then I was invited to speak to about 300 businessmen and women not far from here in a place called Sawmill Creek, Ohio. Okay. So I got off the plane. I didn't even know where Sawmill Creek was. We were driven out there, landed at Cleveland. I spoke to these business people. And Gordon MacDonald was the other speaker. I'd spoken 5 times. And at the end of it, I closed my Bible and I said, I want you all to do me a favor. When you're driving back to the airport or wherever you are in Ohio, will some person in each car please pray for me and my wife? I can't tell you what it is about. We're seeking God's wisdom. That's all I want to tell you. Ask God to give us His wisdom. Margie and I went back to our room, picked up our suitcases. We were walking out. There's a man standing by the glass doors. He said, I want you to know, I went back to my room and I got on my knees and prayed for you. And before I got off my knees, praying for wisdom for you, I said, God, is there anything you want me to do to help this young couple? And he said, God has laid on my heart to give you a check for $50,000. It was 1983, November of 1983. It was a lot of money then, it's a lot of money now. I just looked at him in a state of shock. I was so glad my wife was next to me, because if I'd gone back and told her the story, she'd have said, "Are you sure this man is all right? What kind of person have you met like this, totally out of the blue?" So I looked at him and I said, "Your name is, sir?" He said, "My name is D.D. Davis. I'm from Youngstown, Ohio." He said, "I've loved what you've done this weekend. I want to take care of you." I said, "Mr. Davis, you don't know me, sir. I don't know you. I find it difficult to take so much money from a total stranger. If you will tell me where you live, I will fly in and see you sometime in the next couple of months. And after I tell you what's on my heart, if you still feel so inclined, we can talk further then." He said, No. You're a very busy man, I know." And he said, "I have a plane. I'll fly in and see you. Tell me where you live." And a few days later, he landed in White Plains, New York. We were in Nyack across the Tappan Zee. We sat in the Hilton with him and his wife. And as I poured out the heart for a ministry in Christian apologetics that'll reach the thinker, reach the skeptic, reach the happy pagan, prepare our young men and women in our churches and adults in our churches to be able to give a reason for the hope that is within them, and to be able to give a meaningful answer to the questions that are asked of them, that's what I really want to do. And you know, the tears were running down his face. Do you know what he said to me? He said, "Ravi, I have not even finished high school," he said. He said, "I ran away from home when I was 18. He said, "But I know how to make money." He said, "I've made more money in my life than I'll ever be able to spend. You do what God's called you to do. I will take care of you. This will only be the beginning. Bring some friends together, and we can talk and get this organization underway." And I just got terrified about all of this. I said, wow. I went back home. I couldn't pick up my cup of coffee. I said, "Is this for real?" I said, "What do you want from me? What will this mean for me in my relationship to you?" He said, "Nothing much, just one thing." He said, "Your integrity." He said, "You promise me your integrity, and let your yea be yea and your nay be nay, and I'll take care of you." He honored that trust for 20 years when he passed away 10 years ago. It was not just that we'd lost such a generous giver, which he was. I felt I'd lost a kind of a father figure in him, because he was such a good man. And when he was buried in Youngstown, his two daughters asked if I would come and speak at the funeral. And he was also a military veteran, and so they wrapped the casket in a flag, and when the funeral was over, they took that flag off, folded it, and the daughters said, "We want you to have this. You were the son my father never had, and you were the one he so implicitly trusted." So the ministry was born here. For years and years, Ohio was really our number one state in support because of Didi and several others from this area. When this ministry began and got underway, my goal was to have a team get on the air, do some writing, and get the ministry on every major continent. I didn't know how we were going to do this. I want you to know something. I am not a planner. I am not a process person. There's only two things I really do. I speak and write, and sometimes I'm not sure I'm doing that well enough either. That's all I do. I speak and write. I cannot endure board meetings. I do not like long, drawn-out administrative stuff. If anybody would do that for me, I think my idea of hell at that time was to become an administrator. If you had to administer everything, I just had no attraction to that. I had no such things for figures and planning and scheming and all. I'd prepare a talk. I could write a book. That's all I was trying to do. God started to work. He started to work in ways that made it absolutely sure in my mind this had nothing to do with me. This had everything to do with his calling. You see, just before I left India, I had applied for the Indian Air Force to become a pilot. India was at war with Pakistan. It was just another job. I said, "I've failed at everything else. Let me try GD pilots." They had 300 people interviewed. They were going to select 10. I came in at number 3. So I phoned home and said, "Done it. All the exams are over, physical endurance." I used to be quite the athlete in those days. I used to run great distances every day. I leaped over walls and this and that, and I was selected. So I phoned home and said, "Done. I'm going to be going to the National Defense Academy. I'm going to be in the Indian Air Force." One more interview left. I went for the interview, and a big Churchillian-looking, jowly individual, a wing commander, looked at me after the interview and he said, "Beta," that's in Hindi, it means son. He said, "Beta, you're a nice young man." I thought something horrible is about to happen. He said, "I know you've placed number 3. He said, "But I am going to reject you." I hated that word. I said, "Why?" He said, "This job is about killing, and psychologically you are not equipped to kill." You know, for just a moment, I wondered if I could prove him wrong right then and there, you know. But one look at him, and a fool I wasn't. His size, he would have had me for a meal that night, you know. I walked out of there in a daze. I said, "What on earth?" I had no courage to phone my parents. When I arrived back by train, my parents had brought all their friends along with garlands and sweets at the railway station to congratulate me. I said, "My goodness, you talk about a humiliation out here." I didn't have the heart to tell them. Had I been accepted in the Indian Air Force, I'd have been a minimum commitment for about 20 years. There had been no thought of where God had in mind for me. He blocked my path in order to open the door that He wanted to open for me. The ministry of RZIM began some years after I moved, as I told you the story how it did. 10 years ago, I was in Oxford having breakfast with Alistair McGrath and Michael Ramsden, my colleague. And I said to them, "You know, we're talking about 3 initiatives out here that I'm thinking about. One of them was to have a place where we could train academics philosophically in high-level education at Oxford. Michael Ramsden had been talking about it. Alistair McGrath gave us the possibility. So we were going to open the Oxford Center for Christian Apologetics. The second initiative we wanted to have was Wellspring International, a charitable arm of this ministry that would reach out to the hurting of the world, especially women and children at risk. In all of my travels, I'd seen so many horrific things happening in the prostitution industry. I said, somebody has to be involved in rescuing this. So we started Wellspring International. At that time, my daughter Naomi was working in the White House under President Bush, and they were offering her position under John Ashcroft at the Justice Department. I flew her in from there to tell her, "I know your heart, I know your passion, because right out of graduation from Wheaton, you went to the Dominican to work with orphans." I said, "Would you consider leading this work of rescuing women and children from the sex trafficking industry in Wellspring International?" She went back, prayed about it. She said, "Dad, it's on my heart all along." She anchored that. Then the third vision was to reach the Islamic world, but to do it in a way where we had Westerners prepared to understand the language and the nature of the Quran and understand Islamic doctrine thoroughly to be able to defend their own culture and their own teaching, so that a supervening worldview that was contrary to the worldview that helped found this nation would not be able to overwhelm this culture. Pluralism is a good thing, but the absolute truth and the nature on which this nation was founded, only the truths of the Judeo-Christian worldview could have founded a nation like this. No other worldview could have. You take the Declaration of Independence. Pantheism, Islam would never have framed a statement that we believe these truths to be self-evident, that we are all created equal, endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Hinduism would never have said that. Buddhism would never have said that. Pantheism would never have made a statement that we are all created equal. The karmic system is stratified. And given freedom by our Creator, Islam would never make a statement like that. Islam is a heteronymous culture that dictates for the masses. So I said we need to protect the values. And so we had the third one called SWOD, Scholars with a Dream, because many Muslims were coming to Christ through dreams and visions and so on. But we needed the scholarly side of it. Wellspring International, the Oxford Center for Christian Apologetics, SWOD, Scholars with a Dream, to prepare 100 scholars with a doctoral level degree in Islamics. We are well on our way to accomplishing that. Those 3 landmarks came 10 years ago. Today, when you look at the Oxford Center for Christian Apologetics, to which your pastor has been, it's turning out some of the finest Christian apologists all over the world. You listen to an Amy or Ewing, or you listen to a Michael Ramsden, or you listen to a John Lennox, or you listen to Michelle Tepper and Christian Hofreiter. We've now placed apologists. We're a team of about 40 plus apologists placed in 11 different countries, in countries like Spain, in countries like South Africa, in countries like Australia, India, China, in the United Kingdom, in Canada. We've got a whole slew of well-trained apologists. And I just want to give you a couple of illustrations, and then I'll close. How did God open the door for all of us? When I was invited to speak at the United Nations, the second time I was speaking there, they tell you about 15 to 17 minutes, and you can't go overtly with the gospel. You've got to respect the plurality of those around you. So you speak for about 12, 13 minutes, last 5 minutes, you bring the gospel in. At the end of it, they were all lined up. And one of them was from a former Soviet country. I won't be specific. They were lined up there to shake hands with me, and this man looked at me and he said, I'm the United States, I'm the ambassador to the United Nations from such and such a country. He says, Mr. Zacharias, I hate my job. I don't want to come here. I didn't want to come here. I come from an atheistic country. And every day I kept wondering why I'm here, why I'm here. Today my question was answered. I came here so that I could find God. Will you please pray with me? And I had the privilege of praying with him, seeing him come to Jesus Christ. Just 2 weeks ago, I was in Jakarta, Indonesia, at a wedding. It's a Chinese tycoon, one of the leading industrialists there. There were 10,000 people at the wedding. And I was called at 5:30 in the morning saying there was an Orthodox man following a major guru in India. And this man is from Australia, but he's of Indian stock. He's been wanting to meet you to ask questions. I said, it's 5:30 in the morning. I've got a part to play here and so on. He said, please, this guy wants to see you. He says, come all the way, he wants to see you. A close friend of the man whose son was getting married. I said, can we do it at 3:30 in the afternoon? He said, okay. So this man comes up to our room at 3:30 in the afternoon. It was no more than 30 minutes later, the tears are running down his face, and this high-placed businessman is bending his head, giving his life to Jesus Christ. When I walked out of that hotel that evening, we were about to board the car, get into the car to go for the reception. His wife came to me and said, my husband was a fanatic with the guru that he used to follow. I couldn't believe what he said to me has just happened this afternoon. We see this all over the place. Our radio program is on 2,000 stations. The letters that we get, 10 days ago or 2 weeks ago when we were in Indonesia, my wife went to Papua New Guinea. She's always wanted to go into the interior there. Margie hails from Toronto and wanted to be a missionary to Papua someday, and I followed up all those plans for her when we met. So she said she wanted to go to Papua, and they arranged for a flight to take her into the interior, 5 hours away from Jakarta. And there she was around a table with some missionaries and saw some of the local residents there. And then the father of the missionary was 100 years old. He said, I'm visiting my son, and I want you to know, every day I listen to Let My People Think. I listen to this radio program, the voice of your husband and your speakers. I know them well. That same day, I received a letter from a woman who said she was in a doctor's waiting room listening to one of our podcasts, and a 6-year-old girl came over and said, I think you're listening to Ravi Zacharias. 6 years old. She said, how do you know this guy? She says, my father makes me listen to him every day, From 100 years to 6 years old. If I could tell you the lives that are transformed and how they are changed, you would be quite overwhelmed. I want to close with this little story and then link up to Hayden. I wasn't watching the clock. I'm sure my time's up. So let me at least tell you this. It was a little over 2 years ago, I was speaking in Bahrain. I was invited by the government leadership to speak on Is Peace Possible? I said, I'd like to qualify that with God, yes. Will you let me speak on that? So they're quite a fascinating audience. A young boy came up to me and he said, Mr. Zacharias, can I have your email ID? I said, why do you want that? He said, I have some questions. I thought, oh, questions, I said, okay. I said, don't give it to anybody. Questions. So next day I get this. Dear sir, this is Abraham from Bahrain. We just met last night. I honestly want to tell you that your speech was absolutely awesome. I've been an admirer of your ministry since the time I first heard you speak at Bahrain in 2003. I was only 5 years old then. But now I'm 14 and have finished reading all your books like The Real Face of Atheism, The Lotus and the Cross, Jesus Among Other Gods, Sense and Sensuality, The End of Reason, Why I'm Not an Atheist, The Grand Weaver, Walking from East to West, etc. They made a great impact on my life and my way of thinking. I really wanted to get your email ID, and I'd sent a email to the RZIM office requesting for it, but I've not received a reply for more than a year. Thank you for giving me your ID yesterday. I've also heard many of your tapes, like Barriers to Belief, Absolute Truth in Relative Terms, A Fish Out of Water, A Life That Lost Its Focus, What Happened After God's Funeral, which is my favorite, The Haunting Spectre of Guilt, Though the Fig Tree Does Not Bud, The Lostness of Man, Who Are You, God, etc., etc. You know, sir, you may feel all this is pretty hard for a 14-year-old to digest. But honestly, I love those messages. I saw the DVD of you speaking at the University of Michigan in the Q&A session. Sir, thank you so much for the wonderful impact you've made on my life. I will always remember to pray for you and your ministry. May God bless you abundantly and give you a long, long life. I remain yours faithfully, Abraham Matthew, Bahrain. 14. I flew to Bahrain a few months after that, didn't tell him I was coming. Called them, first called his father, found out he was a medical practitioner at the local hospital. Went and had dinner with them that night. He'd lost his mother when he was only 7 years old, this little boy had. He's a genius. I told the dad, I'm going to keep an eye on your son. God's got his hand upon him. Ladies and gentlemen, our young people are desperately looking for light along their path. Sexually, they indulge till they wipe themselves out. They have nothing fanciful to look forward to anymore. They have spent themselves and they've come away empty-handed. All of the gizmos and all of the stuff we've given to them, they have actually depersonalized the real individual and personalized subjectivity, and they could be talking to total strangers and think they're actually having a meaningful conversation. Our youth are at dire straits on a lonely path to emptiness. I am committed more than ever, and so one of the visions God has given to me to follow this. A year ago, I began to think of setting up a Center for Christian Apologetics in Atlanta, Georgia. We are calling it IACT, the Institute of Apologetics and Contemporary Thought. We're in the process of negotiating the purchase of a large building and a few buildings there to bring in youth from all over the world, to prepare them and train them, to help our churches, help our pastors, have symposiums, bring in the best scholars, have scholars in residence to be able to prepare the church to face a kind of a strident skepticism. You cannot set a tepid Christianity besides a scorching paganism. You cannot set a tepid Christianity besides a scorching paganism. And we have to have that heart warmed and the truth so ably defended. Maybe we'll get a chance on Sunday night to answer some questions on that. And now to my closing thought. It was a year ago in June, I was in Manila in the Philippines, and I'd finished speaking. I'd spoken. There were several thousand in attendance. I was tired out. And a gentleman had asked me to go for dinner. So I said, all right. I'd already told him I'll be tired by the end of the day. No speaking. Just dinner, right? Because I found out there's no free meal when you're in the ministry. It's like doctors going to dinner. They never have a dinner without getting consultations by whoever is sitting next to them. And so I said, okay, if you just want to take me out for dinner. So we're driving, and I thought, something is not right here. Matt was my traveling associate at that time. I said, I have a feeling I'm going to speak here, because why is he taking us so far? So I arrived, and there's about 45 business people sitting around their tables and a lectern. I said, this is no dinner. They're going to eat, and I'm going to talk. Sure enough, he introduces me. I have a friend here, and today's my birthday, and this is my birthday gift to you. So his birthday gift to them was me. So I start speaking. I said, this is no fun, Well, I did. He wanted me to speak on a search for meaning. And then he said, now that we've made this man suffered so much, let's inflict a little more suffering. Why don't you answer some questions? So I said, okay. So I stood up, and this guy here, Hayden Coe, comes up to the front of the microphone, and he puts his arms out like this. He's got a big span. And he says to me, meaning, I'm living with pain, shame, and guilt. Where is their meaning? And there are tears running down his face. He starts to tell his story of trying to take his life a couple of times. I don't know who he was. And all I said to him was, you look like a man made for the movies. I didn't know he was a movie actor. I said, you're talking about pain, shame, and guilt? I said, what you're talking about is so deeply personal. See me after the meeting. I'll talk with you one-on-one. So he came to the back, but of course, because of who he was, the people hovering over, listening to the conversation. And as I saw what was happening in his heart, I thought to myself, I don't want to be speaking. I didn't want to speak. I was like a Jonah. I didn't want to answer questions. I just wanted a break. God brings people into your life at a time you need that person the most, and reshapes and rechanges everything for you. I will guide you with my eye, he said. We embraced each other as we prayed. I knew God was going to use this man enormously. I let him tell you his story, except after he told me the sordid reality of what he'd come through. I said, Hayden, I'm not familiar with this kind of stuff, but I know a guy who is. His name is Sanj Kalra. I said, I'm going to be, because Hayden said, I want to travel with you for several months. I'll pay my way. I said, I'm going to be in Singapore in a few days. I'll fly my friend in. You both talk. I believe he can help you far more than I can, because he will understand where you're coming from. And I kept praying. I don't know if these two boys were going to get along or what. So I flew Sanj in. The rest is God's doing. And the same with my colleague, Matt, who's a principal guy. I've got two of my former travel associates who are still on our staff, and my present one, Thomas. Corinne, followed by Matt, and then Matt got to know Hayden. These guys have been like a light in his world. Bright, shining lights. And no matter where you go in the Philippines, he's a head turner. They know who he is. And now they know what he believes and who he really is as a child of the living God. And I just consider it an awesome privilege to call him my friend. It was God who arranged that meeting. We had never planned it. Our ZIM today was planned by him too. In these 11 countries, touching the globe, having an impact through the literature, through all that's going on, lives are changing. And I believe we have only just begun. And I thank God for your pastors' trust and faith to come alongside us. We need it, because the doors are wide and the opportunities are plentiful. We need men and women like you to come alongside and say, we'll hold you up. You keep running the distance. We're there behind you to help you take the headwinds and reach this generation for Jesus Christ. I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes unto the Father but by me. He is the answer. And we are taking that answer to clear the bushes of their questions so they can take a direct look at the cross of Jesus Christ and understand the gospel. Thank you so much for giving me a hearing.